Hey guys, welcome. Today we are talking about energy flow and how energy interacts with different organisms within our ecosystem, starting from plants who produce their own food to consumers who actually rely on different animals or plants to survive. Now, as you can see in the triangle here, this is what we call an energy pyramid. As you can see, the primary producer is at the very bottom and it occupies the largest amount of space, right? And at the very top is a tertiary consumer. We will go through the terms in a second, but it occupies the smallest region within the triangle. Now let's go through these one by one. A primary consumer is something, a primary producer, sorry, is something that creates or produces its own food. Now, an example of these would be plants or flowers. They undergo a process called photosynthesis, right? Where they use the sunlight and they take in carbon dioxide, as we learned yesterday, and release oxygen, and they produce their own sugar. And they use this sugar to survive. So those are primary producers. Because they produce their own food, they are also known as something called autotrophs. Auto means automatic, or like something that does something on its own automatically. So autotroph. Now let's move on to the next one, which is primary consumer. Now, because it's higher in the food chain, we can automatically assume that the primary consumer eats the primary producer. An example of a primary consumer might be a bug, like let's say a beetle, right? A beetle. Now, a beetle would probably survive by eating plants or parts of plants like leaves. Now, because it does not create its own food, it cannot be called an autotroph, but it can be called something like a heterotroph. So if it does not produce its own food, it's a heterotroph. Now, because primary consumers only eat plants, they're also herbivores. Herb is a part of a plant, right? Herbs are plants, so we can call primary consumers herbivores. Now, let's move on to the next part or the next level in the triangle, which is a secondary consumer. Now, a secondary consumer normally, as you can see, if it's above the primary consumer, it can eat the primary consumer. An example of a secondary consumer might be, let's say, a frog. Now, a frog might eat the beetle, right? So it becomes a secondary consumer. Now, if it only eats animals or insects, it is called a carnivore. So carnivore is a term that is given to those who eat only meat, right? So if the frog only eats beetles or grasshoppers or insects, they will be called as a carnivore. Now, as you can see, it is the third level up here, which also means that in the energy pyramid, it is also the it compared to at least the primary producer and the primary consumer, it gets significantly less amount of energy when it eats that food, right? And finally, we have the fourth level of the pyramid, which is called a tertiary consumer. Now, a tertiary consumer is the one that eats the secondary consumer. For example, a snake. A snake might eat a frog, right? Or a crow. A crow might eat a frog after it dies, or a vulture that might eat the frog. Now, vultures or crows are something called omnivores. That means that they can eat both vegetables or fruits or plants, but they can also eat meat. So if they only eat plants, they're herbivores. If they only eat animals, they're carnivores. But if they eat animals and plants, they are omnivores. Okay? Now, as you can see, because it occupies the smallest space, we can assume that the energy that tertiary consumers get when they're eating their food is significantly less compared to secondary consumer or primary consumer or primary producer. Now, I want you guys to use this information to go ahead and complete our guided practice activity, to make sure you guys are taking appropriate notes. When I show you guys my answers, please go ahead and compare them with your own answers and see if they kind of match. If they don't look the same, please make changes on your worksheet. And I will go ahead and show you them now. And please take the time to note them down. Please pause if you feel like that is necessary and note them down. So these were the answers. I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you guys later. Bye.